terms of like vocabulary and the type of emerging digital payments, and then I'm going to kind of layer in a little bit about where crypto or blockchain is kind of emerging, or where we see more of those use cases within the payments industry.
That's awesome.
It's good timing. I did a lot of shopping the last couple of days, and I was like thinking about this talk today, and I was just like I needed another rabbit hole to go through, but I was just wondering about all that level of infrastructure. You know what I mean?
The infrastructure. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and of course I'll layer on as much kind of applications in terms of the blockchain, where cross border and things like that. So yeah. So Laura, are you going to share this, or should we give it another minute, or should we get started?
Yeah. Let's just maybe give it one more minute since it's just 3 o'clock now. And are you going to run it, Patrick? You're going to run it with your
Do you
screen,
want to share, or yeah, oh yeah, I said I was going to do that, right? And you
and
were
I'll
going to
watch
monitor.
the chat.
Yeah, I'm not good at doing both, so yes.
I can't do both. I
I
can't even
can't.
have the camera on when I'm doing the presentation. I got to learn to get better at that or get two screens.
So yeah, so Amara was talking about how payments are really important, and he wants to get people to post about using payments. So I think to get that kickstarted, I'll probably make some clips out of this discussion, and we'll post them and get some more traction going. So this really fits in together. Looking forward to the presentation.
Oh, nice. You're so creative, Archie. I wonder if you can make them as thumbnails since you have the YouTube channel. Isn't that a thing? Like,
Yeah, yeah. So we could go back and like for the first video, I did actually make like a title screen and a thumbnail. And with time, I think we'll organize that and change it up
I'm not giving
and
you
switch
more
it
work,
up.
sweetie.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah, no worries. It's all about, like, is it an archive? Are we going to promote it? So we'll see. We'll see how things move along.
Okay, perfect. Well, Patrick, you want to get started?
Yeah. Let me. Can you see my screen? Is it showing? Or are you seeing you?
I
It
saw it for
was
a minute.
showing. Yeah, not anymore.
Do it again.
How about that?
Yep,
It's good?
Looks like
it's
it's
pretty
loading
good.
up.
Yep. Okay. I'll do it. I don't like presentation mode, but I'll do it because it's much easier to see. So, um, and please stop me with any questions. When I was preparing this, like I said, I wanted to um, kind of everything. So when I went to work for Mastercard, I was given a lot of like videos and YouTube videos, and the good thing about that is they don't always give you that, but my executive gave me that, and they were very very technical about card rails or payments. But what I kind of realized is I wish I had had a little um, more basic level of understanding payments and uh, issuing and acquiring around digital payments and the history of it. And that's just a little bit about what the motivation for this is to take it, like we talked about acceptance last time, and how to expand the acceptance footprint and what is needed for acceptance, and like how important the acceptance is. But now we're going to take it back and just say, okay, this is digital payments, and we're not going to start with wires, but we're going to kind of just do a highlight of some of these digital payments, and kind of the a little bit about the uh, what a four-party system is, and then how the evolution of digital payments is emerging. And I should say that my thing very much is B2B payments, right? So not so much on consumer payments like we would do, but like a B2B payment, meaning like Walmart paying Coca-Cola and invoice. But this is more geared towards, just payments or digital payments in general. So Um, and that's what we were. I say digital, we say electronic, but just the basic payment terms, like I said, that I wish I had know what every party plays in this. What we'll talk about is the four-party system, and we can kind of talk a little bit about like um, how some of the fintechs and blockchain are kind of wanting to go to more of a two-party or peer-to-peer system a little bit, and then just the basic type of payment processes that go into it. Um, so I remember when I was, and I would use these analogies a lot. I remember when I was like my first day or my second day at Mastercard, and somebody said, "Go talk to this person," right? And she's a good friend of mine now, and still is a good friend of mine. But she kept on using this term issuer. That well, the issuer wants to do this, and the issuer wants to do that, right? But there's kind of four parts that are involved in a traditional payment system, right? You've got the card holder, and this is the card is like the plastic or who owns or who is the accountable party that holds a piece of plastic or holds a virtual card or something like that, right? It's that has a bin or a bank identification number tied to it, as well as a bank identification number and an account number, right? So it's whoever holds the fund or the allocation of that is going to authorize the payment, right? Then you have the issuer. A lot of times we talk about this as the issuing bank, right? Most of this terminology that you still see in digital payments is around cards, but you will still see the issuing is the one that is extending the credit or the debits that's issued to the consumer. So they're taking on the risk, right? So, but they're the ones that is like, okay, if I have a piece of plastic that has a MasterCard on it that's issued by US Bank, right? The issuer is the one, and they're representing the card holder in this situation. Um, a lot of we talked a lot about merchants last time, right? Because that's all the acquiring side. So and sometimes we talk about in especially in B2B payments, the supplier or the vendor or the business owner. And then you have we talked a little bit about this, the acquiring or the acquiring bank. So this is the one that the issuer on behalf of the cardholder is sending money to the acquiring bank in traditional such as or in traditional types of payments that then the merchant can access, right? And what we see is even within these individual kind of four-party system that we'll talk about, there's also other third-party payment processors that are involved in this process that are actually either hardware facilitators or they are processors such as FIS, and that is still Stripe is one that is partnering with the payment processors to help facilitate some of these transactions. There's also like WEX and TSYS that do all of this, and they're the really ones that do the hardware that are actually in the banks, right? That are processing a lot of these payments in the banks. So I said a lot, but does anybody have any questions just on kind of the basics of how digital payments work in more of the traditional sense? No?
No, that was good, Patrick.
Okay.
Very comprehensive.
Okay. So what you have to have is a payment gateway. And I think about you have a network, right? And the network is the one that is enabling all of this. They're making sure that you have a checklist so that as like in blockchain or crypto, right? That is enabling that has set up the APIs, right? That is making sure your wallet is connected, right? All of those services that go in is really the gateway. So it's it's a merchant service, but we talk about like an e-commerce platform that authorizes the credit. So this is really the things that say all that go into the payment gateway to say yes, I can authorize this type of transaction. So We have gateways, and gateways, it's oversimplified in this situation, but I think as we know in DigiByte and in crypto that with all the APIs that have to be in the wallet and connecting and everything like that, those are all pieces of what we would call parts of the gateway. So we're kind of overgeneralizing it here, but it's everything from a compliance perspective, from a technology perspective, that makes sure that you can securely transfer the information. Um, a lot of times it uses tokenization or some sort of one-way hash to submit payment details. And these one-way hashes, I mean, honestly, in the credit card are just like for your traditional payment processing are are encrypted files with hashed information in it, right? And if you know enough, you can kind of map that back. But these are all kind of like legacy systems, and I think blockchain is doing that. Is the next technology to do this more securely, and then making sure that you have industry-wide security guidelines or PCI standards. That's very credit card centric, but I think that in somewhat with ACH as well. But making sure that all these X's and O's and checklist items and the technology that when you get that file of all those transactions that were made, right, that it is securely can be mapped and that it's very, very, very secure. And that's one good thing about compared to check or other types of transactions is that as I should say as manual processes as it is, the credit card payments are very, very secure because there's all these guardrails around. But the payment gateway is really like the vessel and the technology and the processes and procedures that enable some sort of digital payment. And I'm going to, from ACH, which is a little bit different of payment gateway, to a card, to a cross border, which is primarily like a wire or anything like that. Any questions on that? Okay. So this is kind of the payment flow. I just want to put a little schematic in here because we can talk a little bit about this. Card holder, they're the ones that authorize the payment, right, from the POS system. They're saying, okay, I'm paying the merchant, but then the merchant is communicating the acquirer through that payment gateway. And then there's some sort of protocol for the card network that goes back to the issuing bank. And then it kind of flows through there. And the reason I'm going to gloss over this a little bit is we'll talk a little bit more about um, how that works in a minute. But you've got all kinds of global payment methods, right? So you have, and the interesting part is most of your, with the exception of credit cards, are really the enabler for a lot of this because they have the biggest network, and even some of your digital wallets like Apple Pay and Google Pay. Um, are really linking a card or a bank account, right? So, and then they store all your money instead of plastic now that we basically have all the information on a credit card. We've gone from plastic to now holding plastic in more of a digital type of way. You have bank debits, which are a little. We'll talk a little bit about later the difference between debits and credits. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but there's a little bit nuances in how those work. Traditionally, more of your bank debits are done on the automated clearinghouse or ACH transaction, which we're all very used to when we have to pay our mortgage or we have to pay our rent. Um, you see more buy now pay later, like that was a big thing about 2 years ago, and I see it's coming back in vogue right now a little bit. But it's basically extending credit. So it starts out on a different some sort of payment gateway and then ends up on another payment gateway. Usually it starts out in like some sort of a debit transaction that translates to a credit transaction, but you see more of these different multi-tier type of gateways or payment systems going on in digital payments now. In I should mention that in buy now, pay later, BNPL is very much a consumer term. There's a term or there's a function in B2B payments called supply chain finance. As anybody's very interested in that, it's very fascinating to me, but it's a similar idea of usually buy now, pay later transactions. Like I said, we're consumer, but they do the similar thing when I use the Walmart paying Coke example, where a buyer is extending up to millions of dollars of credit to a supplier, right, at any time, which is supply chain finance. And then in other countries, in South America, particularly, you're seeing these emerging payments of where they're using it's like a voucher where I get a digital something, and then I can go actually put get cash out, right? So it's not like a plastic credit card or a debit card that I'm using, but it's something like I'm paying with a ticket because I've got credit or somebody's submitted payment to me that I can actually go and get cash out that's not necessarily tied to a bank. So I said a lot there. Any questions so far on what I've said?
I
No,
could think
but I
of
think.
oh,
Oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Jason.
I was just gonna say. So, how much of this is? And I know it's balanced, but like, there's a legal framework, and there's also like the standards by technology. Do you think blockchain has the technology already, or is it limited more by the legal and like the regulatory framework?
I think it does, and I think we go back to the four-party system. Is basically you've got a card holder or a merchant, and you're eliminating the acquirer. The acquirer becomes a two-party system, right? So that's really what you're doing, right? In a blockchain type of payment, or excuse me, a peer-to-peer blockchain type of payment. But I think that there are and like of course if you have a digital wallet and I have a digital wallet we can exchange crypto, but when it comes to fiat it's a little bit different, and it seems like there's always some sort of banking or bank or regulator that's involved now,
Awesome, awesome. Thank you.
you know. I mean, I keep on thinking that you're going to eliminate the banks, but it seems like they're just getting more involved in um and I think the idea here is like, hey, if we live in a world where people have enough crypto and like that platform, where it's like I'm a buyer, a seller has enough crypto that they can start to basically trade. The platform is even where it starts to eliminate um the issuing banks and acquirers. I think that's a good thing, but I don't know if like the adoption is there, at least in the United States. I can't say as much as for like countries like Singapore or what's happening in like Argentina, for instance, right? So I think that might be a very geo-specific type of question too.
That's a good
Does
way.
that
That
sort of answer the question?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Thank you.
that's a good way to describe it. And I have to say, I tend to be narcissistic and think about everything through an American perspective. So that's a good reminder that a lot of this stuff as it evolves could, geo specific, like you said.
Well, it's like plastic and is like um United States, like Asia, for instance, went from cash to they were very much adopting digital payments before, right? With their, real-time payments type of networks and how they built that infrastructure the last 30 years where they really kind of bypassed this idea of plastic or physical digital payment that was done on like a Visa or MasterCard network.
I have one last question on that too. The last point you had made about the buy now, pay later model and how, like there's like whether it's retail or whether it's B2B. Um, is that the kind of model they would use, let's say, for like a UBI, a universal basic income? Is that the I'm just trying to keep it in perspective as just
I don't
curious.
know. I
Okay.
just I don't know. I think of buy now, pay later as kind of like, the new version of layaway, right? Where it's like, I don't have the funds right now, but zero interest, right? Um, but a lot of times they extend the the buyer or the issuing bank is extending credit on behalf to make that purchase, and they're doing that on like a card rail, yet the the buyer, the card holder, the buyer, the person with the funds is then paying a basically a real-time payment or a cash, an ACH type of payment on installments to the acquiring bank and then back to the merchant over time. I don't know, Laura. What were you saying? What were you saying? What I'm not familiar with that term.
UBI,
Yeah.
universal basic income. It's we've been talking about it in different places and modeling it, but it's like basically everybody gets a certain amount every month. Um, kind of like the COVID checks, but like all the time.
Oh, like a remittance.
Yeah, kinda, but like societal wide. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yes, I was just curious. I mean, it's not like I don't know if it was even a great question, but it just made me think about that model you were talking about. I was like, I wonder if that's how it could be applied, because that's something I'm really curious about as well.
Oh, how it could be applied to possibly, or the fund, or how you would remit those type of payments or underwrite and remit those type of payments.
Yeah, but I don't
And
wanna
there's
hold you up. You can
No,
it's just like
there's other kinds of digital type of payments. Like, we didn't even talk about wires, right, which are
okay,
the
yeah,
most risky type and the most uh every time I do a wire payment, I get so nervous, and I repeat that number back 5 times. And the thing is like wire payments, there's really no cap on how much you can do. They're still the most in vogue of for cross-border payments and remittance, which is, I think that's where MasterCard was really headed, right? With blockchain for cross-border type of payments, right? Which is now really you can only do wires, which are like super scary. But there's other types of um I mean, we could talk about like bank debits. I mean, and they kind of cross over like ACH. We talked about real time payments a little bit, which is like the new framework for ACH payments. Basically, they run batch instead of like once every 3 days. They run batch like 3 times a day, right? So there's other types of global payment methods, but this is just to like highlight some of the um, existing infrastructure that's there, but also some of the emerging type of stuff.
makes sense. Thank
Okay.
you.
Now to my favorite. And there is a life cycle that goes into all of this, right? So, and this is what digital payments are really good, unlike check, right? Where people still write bad checks all the time. Is check fraud is still big. And I think that's one thing that I always, when I'm talking about things like this, is checks and paper and cash are still very much adopted worldwide. And I was reading something the other day that check fraud is back, and I was like, check fraud has always been there, right? But how I think the promise really with digital type of payments, I think it's great because it's really powered e-commerce, right? And a lot of this um, is to power e-commerce, where wouldn't that be awful if I had to write a check to Amazon or they underwrite my check and then I wrote a check to them and then it went like that. But a lot of this is to really power e-commerce, right? Um, but there's kind of like a life cycle, and this is really about the cards. It's a similar type of function for ACH and real-time payments and all of these other type of transactions where there's authorization, right? So sometimes you might put a check in there and to cover your thing, but you're still authorized, right? So they want to make sure. So that's the kind of the first thing when you're at the point of sale, going back to acceptance is like, okay, yes, this bank has said, or the issuer has said, yes, this is you can proceed with making this purchase at the point of sale for the merchant. Authorization is very bank centric. So, you know, you might sometimes you might have different banks have different rules on this, but it's basically saying, yes, let me start the process to do it. So, authorization, and this has gotten a lot more sophisticated over time. Then, typically, there is the authorization passes through, the purchase is quote unquote made, but there's all kinds of stuff the payment processor is doing behind the scenes. And this is what I think where the stripes and there's all kinds of different services that has helped the batching process now, right? But it's still in terms of speaking from credit card here is an ACH real-time payments too, they still go through a batching process where this is where all the other information comes back through, whether it's a compliance and if there was any discrepancy or if that check didn't clear or something like that, making notes on those. And like I said, more advanced digital payments have put more services in this to make this process a little bit faster and less manual, but it's still a big part of digital digital kind of payments. Then there's the clearing, and that's where it's basically an accounting type of thing that's done. It's clearing is basically reconciliation, like you used to do with your checkbook, right? Or anything like that that says, yes, this is the amount to pass through. There's no, it takes all like any type of fees that were handled. Maybe it's a cross border transaction, the interchange fees, what we'll talk about later, but any kind of like, this is the amount, any kind of deductions, and it just kind of reconciles it. It basically becomes in a file that is then given to the acquiring bank. It's like a ledger between the acquiring and the issuing bank, and then the settlement happens, and that's where the payments or funds are authorized, right? And that's usually sometimes the payments are already sent, but this is where it's kind of like the settlement is, where you actually have the deposit of funds into the merchant account. And like ACH credit card transactions, this is like a 1 to 2 day thing. ACH 3 days, real time payments, 1 day, but it's a lot about that four-party system and really um, the level between the issuer and the acquirer and what they're set up for. But this is kind of very fascinating to me, and then we should talk about card payments are pull transactions. That's where you're pulling the money from the issuer. But I just want to make that because you'll hear pull and push transaction. Any questions on kind of like the how processing works? I said a lot, and there's no visual. I apologize, but any questions on like the life cycle?
That's blockchain with extra steps.
Yeah, so you got authorization and settlement, right? is blockchain, right? You're eliminating this, right? And notice these are like 4 steps, kind of like a four party system. But in the authorization, I mean, you just authorize, and then you settle, right? Instantaneously, pretty much, with some consent.
As long as the centralized party is still working.
Um, oh, still some of my favorite transactions, or I just want to talk about ACH transactions because these are push, right? So, um, I am as the card holder, or as I shouldn't say the card holder, but as the person paying, I'm pushing transactions to it. And like I said, a lot of this consists of a data file, right? We're all very familiar with ACH transactions. Um, and these are very slow, and they're usually run by some sort of like clearinghouse. THC is that? I shouldn't say T. Sorry, the automated. What is it? TCH, is that it? The clearinghouse. Yes, yes, the clearinghouse here in the states. Uh, this is just basically a push payment. Is a debit payment. Um, so pretty much the same time, and when you're doing a debit payment, you're doing an automated transaction on a card, but basically the push is doing it similarly with a little bit faster of a rail or payment processor that's going in. But ACH payments um, are still very popular types of payments in the digital world. Like I said, Stripe and these other companies are helping to facilitate some of this because like the problem with an ACH payment is number one, it's slow. You have to have a lot of information both on the issuer or like the both sides of the bank, and then also there's very little data that is submitted with an ACH transaction. So, you've seen them, you get a little bit about like, this is the amount, this is the merchant, this is the date and time. But ACH payments are still very much used domestically in the United States as well as other places. And kind of the evolution of ACH payments or real time payments, which are basically ACH payments that are peer to peer, but they still use an issuer and acquiring bank, and they're just push transactions. Um, so I
Would
should
it
say, oh, sorry,
would an example of that be like Venmo? Like, is that
Venmo can be both. Venmo can be a card payment or an ACH transaction,
okay?
depending on the way it's set up. But
Gotcha.
yes, but Venmo uses ACH like block, so and they do it kind of two different ways. You know how when you do Venmo and they say, do you want your money on Tuesday? Because I always make a lot of Venmo payments on Friday. They say, do you want it on Tuesday or do you want it instant? And they charge a fee for instant. So if you choose, oh, I want it in 3 to 5 days, they're using an ACH payment, which is pretty secure and there's not much money in it. But it's the banks are kind of like that's what banking do. But then if you want the instant payment, they're going to put it on another rail like a real time payment. But then sometimes Venmo, you can actually use your credit card on Venmo, which would go on the credit card rails. So they're kind of like I think Venmo, Square, and or Block, excuse me, use they've kind of facilitated this idea of ACH real time payments and credit card payments uh, to based on the need that the person either you paying or receiving the money needs, but also giving other people more options based on where they live, their credit, um, how much money they have in the bank account, stuff like that. Laura, I know that's a very
No,
complicated
that's
answer
great.
to your question.
No, that was good. I mean, that really helped me kind of think about it in perspective of something I use every day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a good. I think that was a good explanation.
And I think that yeah, so I think that they're using they're really just facilitating different types of of these digital payment methods that they can. um, so, how do banks make money? And here we can talk about a little bit of blockchain, but there's like, how do banks make money off of this? And usually there's some sort of fees that are involved. So for for checks, they're kind of been cutting them for 60 years. They don't really charge you they charge you for checks, but they don't charge you to make a check payment, or maybe they charge you a fee every month for your checking account, even though it costs the banks a lot of money to process checks. Um, ACH are very, very cheap because it's very slow and it's very established. So usually, when you're making a payment on ACH, there's a very and merchants like, I mean, I should say merchants don't like it because it takes 3 to 5 days to receive their money, which is a drawback. But also, the processing costs are very slow. I mean, are very low. Real-time payments now, the evolution of ACH payments have, like I said, they might charge you a convenience fee, right? But they're still, if the infrastructure there, they're still pretty cheap to make. But a lot of times merchants don't accept credit cards because credit card companies make an interchange, right? Well, I shouldn't say they don't make the interchange, but they set the interchange. So this is what we talk a lot about with fees. But this is interchange is just a schedule depending on the merchant, the issuing bank, the acquirer, um, where the transaction, the amount of the transaction, and where the transaction is taking place. And they come up with this idea of interchange, right? And interchange is very interesting as opposed on credit cards versus other types of payments that tend to be flat. Your interchange fee has a lot more variables that go into this. So the reason I say that is a lot of times merchants don't accept, even though you get your money a lot faster with some of these like digital type of payments like credit card. A lot of merchants don't take it because the interchange fees cuts into their bottom line. um Interchange is of something to like, you can, there's research on this. It's something to keep up with because my time at MasterCard, um they are on a path to eliminate interchange. Now, how do they do that? Because this is where they make their money, right? Well, the issuers make most of the money on the interchange. MasterCard takes a piece of that fee. They set the interchange, but they take a piece of the fee. It's like a drop in the bucket of that interchange rate. But going forward, interchange has complicated a lot of things. It has made it, but they're on a mission to kind of say, hey, how can we monetize other types of services that we provide and eliminate interchange over the next 10 to 15 years? So, of course, we see some of this in blockchain or in crypto too, right? Where there's a cost of transaction, and a lot of times, right, or especially when I want to like get fiat, and that's really an evolution of interchange, that it's just like the cost of doing business on a platform between two or four parties. So, any questions on that? Does that make sense? Oh, I think I think that was it on digital payment. Does anybody have any questions on digital payment or other types of applications, or my thoughts on um, other things?
Hey, I have a question. So when you're talking about the different, exchange costs and yeah, like how really any time that you're going to be interacting, you're going to have that exchange cost. How could they couldn't survive without them. So
Oh, we're trying to figure it out. Other things that so Mastercards and Visa's stance on that is we're not going to charge you from a consumer perspective every time you swipe a card, everything, anytime anything is settled or cleared, settled really on our payment rails. But we offer you all these other things, um, data, uh, fraud protection, security, all these other things now we're going to charge the bank, we're going to offer to the bank that we do now, but we're going to eliminate just the cost of doing business because they do a lot of other things like monitoring, protection, evolution of the network to make it more secure, make it more fast, and things like that. B2B payments are a different story because B2B payments become a lot more um, B2B payments a lot more uh, risk reward. So looking at B2B payments as a vehicle because it's like, whenever I go to Amazon and I want something, it's like I don't permit submit them an invoice, right? It's like or giving them a purchase order for what I want to do on Amazon, right? I just go in there and like swipe my card. But like with B2B payments, you're going through that invoicing, you're going through the purchase order, you're going through the invoicing, you're doing and these are if I mess up, it's like if Amazon messes up, they're out what like $200, anywhere from $30 to $200, right? We're not big ticket items on Amazon, or maybe a TV or something like that, right? But it's not. But if B2B payments mess up, there's a reconciliation, there's the more compliance that's involved, and then I mean they're submitting payments of $500,000 to $1 million at a time, right? So there's a different other services that they provide on B2B payments, which I think is kind of fascinating, right? So consumer payments have kind of become a commodity, and I think that's where we, in terms of digital payments, have a lot of opportunity to like cut the middleman out, meaning the issuers and acquirers. But I think that there's also the whole world of B2B payments, which is very, very a different beast in itself. Or in international trade, countries paying countries and things like that. So
okay, I
So
have
do you
other.
think? Uh,
No, Archie, go.
yeah, I was just gonna ask. Do you think that these decentralized blockchains have a chance to actually subvert the system, or you think it's just going to get integrated and more efficient?
I think it's I keep on saying I think it's country by country right now. It's almost like or region by region. So I do, but I don't know in the United States if it becomes more um, if the banks start to leverage more of the blockchain technology within things that I said, like with cross border. But I think in other countries, Australia, Asia regions like Asia Pac, uh, Eastern Europe, South America, it's a different beast down there where I don't think that there's much bigger opportunity to upend the systems there.
My perspective on that's a bit unique. Now, when you say blockchain, you could mean just the use of current technologies. Then you've got the aspect of decentralized blockchains. Now, whether or not companies or corporations or financiers will use the decentralized ones are a question. If you take in regards like Binance, it's technically a blockchain, but it's not a decentralized blockchain.
Right.
So that's another aspect to that thing that you have to kind of work out. Like if they do use blockchain, is it going to be a decentralized blockchain? Or are they going to own the blockchain themselves?
I hope it's a decentralized.
Well, and also to that note, I know, I think it was just in one state. Didn't Elon Musk get approval for a money service business license or an exchange license? Does, any, does anybody have? I can look it up.
I don't know.
Where?
I would have noticed that
Let me look it up real
between
quick. But does
SpaceX
anybody else
and
have what?
between SpaceX and X, I can't keep up.
Well, I want to say it was a couple weeks ago, but I'm gonna look it up if anybody else wants to have any questions while I'm doing
Like, but it's
Also,
for me. Oh, what were you saying?
well, I was going to chime in on the supply chain finance. The reason that the whole IOUs or the lack of immediate transparency in the payments is there's so much friction between, like you mentioned, banks, automatic clearinghouses, and all that other stuff. There's so much friction there that they have to be IOUs because they can't process it immediately. Everybody's got to take their cut of the fees to process from bank to international to bank to whatever credit card processors and back again to the customer. So that's a issue all in itself.
Yeah, it's supply chain finance is super scary to me. Um, yeah, it's super scary to me on how because they need commerce, right? So if the vendor has or the supplier has something that they're going to sell, they just can't fund to make enough widgets that okay, well, I'm the buyer, I'm going to go ahead and finance that for you because I have a little bit better credit. But they're I mean, these companies are financing millions of dollars and extending millions of dollars of credit on the fly. And it's to your point, there's so many people trying to get a piece of that. But it's when I was working in supply chain finance, I mean, it's nothing new, but it was super scary to me about like how they're doing these IOUs, right? And what and it always works better when the buyer in this or the buyer has higher credit score than the supplier, but they're writing off bad debts all the time, and I'm like, this is not good for like the overall economy.
Yeah, when you realize that,
Oh, I think he just went out.
to
I
say the
can't hear
least.
you. There you go.
I think we lost you.
I think we lost you for just a minute there. What did you just say?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so with vendors like Walmart, with several different suppliers, the amount of debt out there at any given time is a lot.
Yeah, it's super scary, and Walmart's willing to eat that. Like, it's super scary how much credit that a lot of these the corporations are extending. I mean, they become banks of their own, which is super scary to me.
And
Scary
government's
me,
focused on
Greg.
regulating blockchain.
Yeah. Huh.
Okay, I did find it. I did. I sent you a link to
Okay.
the article, and I don't have it on my. Oh, I should just. I'll put it in here as well. But so
Oh, on
yeah,
Twitter. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, Elon Musk. Yeah, 13 states so far. He's been issued money trans money transmitter license. So that's kind of
Yeah,
interesting.
I think he wants to integrate that into X and make X a payments and platforms such as that as well financially.
Didn't
Well,
Facebook try that where you could like basically use Messenger to send money? It
That's right.
sounds familiar. Yeah,
They
didn't they
had,
do
Libra.
I think they had the Libra, which was a basket of different currencies supposedly.
that thing? Yes.
Yeah. So I think a lot of different players trying to get into this space. They must be seeing a lot of value in it.
Well, I think they are. I mean, uh, there's, I mean, the payments. I mean, we just touched on like a one millionth of the piece, and this was like, I just find this so fascinating. These discussions that we're having on supply chain finance and credit, extending the credit, and how what technologies are being used for this. That, and then of course how governments are playing a role in all of this too, slowing it down, speeding it up, however you want to look at it. But I think it's very um, regional and country specific um, thing. I try not to look here in the United States so much as much as in other places of the world and what's happening in other places of the world, because um, in some ways, I mean, they are they're they're bypassing things that we've gone through in the United States, but in some ways that they don't have certain types of regulation or influence from the government. Like Russia is not a good example, right? Where the government is the bank, right? Or the bank is the government, right? But there's other Asia Pac, South America. There's a lot of different opportunity there that's emerging a lot faster than it here is in the United States or Western Europe or other places in the world.
One has to ask how Apple got the financial license in their ecosystem. Granted, it's a walled ecosystem, so it's not similar to Twitter or X. So it's got more safeguards in place. As far as Twitter goes, I would put it past Elon Musk with his history of PayPal, having started that. So he might know, but have to get through regulatory tape.
Yeah. I think, Musk, his company was acquired. What was his company was acquired by PayPal, right? And that his company, I forgot what the name of it, but because he came into PayPal, he was doing his own thing, and then he got acquired by PayPal, and that's what set that valuation off the chains.
eBay.
Was
Was
it
it eBay?
eBay?
But
I think it was eBay.
I think it was he had his own payment company.
We're all Googling it.
Yeah, scary, right?
I think he named that company X as well because he has a fascination with that
Yeah,
for some reason.
was something
So
like that. It was something like that.
XPay, I think.
XPay, yes.
Yeah, Xpay.
Interesting. I have to say, this is all fascinating and a little terrifying to me. I mean, it will be interesting though if, like, what happens as he pursues this payment method and how that integrates into
I mean, I
to.
think there's an opportunity because other people, I shouldn't say, then, I mean, we know there's a consolidation here in the United States of big banking, right? Where we're going to have like four banks, um, maybe three once Wells Fargo, explodes by day now. But that's kind of scary, right? Where you potentially are going to have these like super conglomerates of banks that basically control a lot of our cash. But then I think you see the Walmarts and other companies that are also in Apples that are also becoming banks. I mean, they've got enough cash where they can underwrite and they can do this and they can do that.
I
So
heard this was really true for airlines as well. I heard that's most of their
airlines,
operation
all the
is banking. Yeah.
co-branding with the airlines, right? With the co-branding that they're doing with the banks. Um, yeah, they can. I mean, when it comes to certain things that they can do that, it's kind of like a scary proposition. Um, if it's like, okay, am I going to get rid of like all my regional banks, and then but now I have Delta and Frontier and Alaska Airlines and Walmart and Amazon that are replacing those.
I never really thought about it that way though. Wow, That's interesting.
Well, after
And it,
2008, most of the small banks got bought out or eaten up by the bigger banks. So right now at the moment, I think there's only like what 8 or 9 major banks that are actually buying up all the other banks. So
Yeah, it's definitely something to watch and keep an eye on because
and I think as
definitely attract.
consumers, I mean, it's like I think another thing that like hinders is like I can make lots and lots of payments online, right? As a consumer, but um I better not receive too many payments, or else I'm going to get that 1099K now, right? So they came out with that because in the United States they're concerned that oh people are doing business under that and the government wants a piece of that, right? So I think it's they've also done things for electronic payments that may have not been great for the merchant or the acquiring type of type of arm from a consumer's perspective.
well,
So
on
now
that note, too, going back to one of your slides with the authorization, clearing, and all that stuff, if you look at it from a different perspective, you could say that the customer of the bank holds a public key. The bank that authorizes it holds the private key, and then they transfer it to someone else to clear it, who owns another private key that the bank holds a public key to. It's just basically a clusterfuck of inefficient steps.
inefficient steps, very much so. But it works, right? I mean, they're pretty good at it. They're comfortable at it, but it's very a lot of different encryption of files that have to be encrypted or unencrypted by somebody, viewed, passed along, encrypted again in a format that makes like a string of numbers that makes sense to somebody.
On a similar thread, well, maybe not, but how do you think the public nature of like the really decentralized blockchains will make an impact? Do you think that if anyone can, kind of how would you say, if anyone can audit the blockchain or check all of that, was that going to make a significant difference to how these types of systems operate?
I don't know if I can answer that.
Maybe a better
Who
question
knows?
is what that's very hypothetical. Like how transparent is the current banking system and these different payment rails? It's pretty obfuscated, right?
I think it's. I mean, I think it's pretty like how it works is pretty um transparent and safeguarded and all of that. I think that, like I said, the way you set up the issuer and acquiring relationship and where they are with all of that can make a lot of big difference in terms of like the data that you get and all that. But I mean, and, and I shouldn't talk about this because I know more about B2B payments, so I'm not so sure about the consumer. But I think that's pretty much set.
I would say that will it change the way that systems operate? No. With the advent of blockchain technology, will it change what customers or users of those technologies or services want to do? Yes. As far as transparency goes on the customer side with KYC and AML, oh yeah, that's transparent as it can be, at least to the government. Now, when you start getting into businesses and trusts and other corporations with multiple banks, it becomes a little murky.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense.
and I think what's murky about KYC too is in is like how they report on KFC or KYC, sorry, KYC requirement, right? Um, is very kind of unusual. Like how they say they've met these requirements of KYC.
Which would be interesting going back to this discussion about Elon doing payments through X.
Should we do a KYC topic one day?
I think that would be good.
Yeah, I think
I
that would
think
be
that
really
would be good.
fun.
That's my bread and butter. So I feel like so removed now. I feel so removed.
Yeah, that would be good, but it made me think about, like, okay, so if X goes into, like, a they have the licensing, right, to money transmitter license, you only would be able to use that if you had a blue check mark or you went through an extra level of hoops. Like, I'm not verified on Twitter. My personal account isn't, so, it's just a way to I could see that being or they'd have to do it, right? They'd have to.
Well, if Twitter, let's. I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. Look, because given Elon Musk's history with certain regulations and his recent book summit where he said "go f yourself," and he made clear that some regulations aren't necessarily good. If he chooses to use blockchain technology, he can literally tell the regulators to go f themselves and run it on Twitter. Now, whether or not Twitter will survive that, who knows?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a fascinating. I mean, it's a fascinating thing to think about. I don't know. I don't know enough about this stuff yet. We'll have Elon on next month to explain all this to
The problem I think with KYC is it's very, at least in the United States, it's KYC. I mean, if you read some of this, there's you have to know your customer, but there's not a lot of guidance on what that, especially in like the digital world. And here we know, and I go back to the United States is we know everything about here. It's very easy to do KYC in the United States. Like, and to say, hey, before I open a bank account, I just need to make sure that this person lives here, right? I need I need two forms of verification to validate that this person lives here and they can open up a bank account, right? And they can do business as a bank, I'm supposed to do ongoing due diligence, right? I'm supposed to check these person. I'm supposed to have all these red flags involved. You know, this is a bad actor. This is somebody that's fraudulent. This is, where like I have enough intelligence to do that. And I think here in the United States, they get by with that. It's fine to do KYC, watch lists and things like that. But I think as you get to cross-border payments, as you get to other countries, as businesses start to expand, that becomes where it's very, very murky on what is acceptable. Like Twitter's a global platform, right? It's not just here, and that's where it gets very kind of murky in terms of what KYC is. Like
Well,
when
you could look at Apple as well. They're worldwide, global, and they have a financial system. And now, how they do KYC is up for question. If Elon can get someone from Apple to be like, "Hey, how do you do it?" then that might be a reasonable thing to do. But as far as how Apple actually does it, I have no idea. But they're global as well.
they probably use the banks, right? They probably use banking information, and then they probably use Google Maps, or excuse me, Apple Maps too, and they call it. They've got those two pieces of information, and and then they do some other authentication, so they're probably using that. I mean, I'm I'm guessing from my experience working with Apple in 2015 on what they were thinking, right? About like, I know where somebody lives, I know where somebody's device is, and then I have a relationship with the bank. So there we go. These are all big businesses too, right? We're talking about what's scary to me is like this is all big businesses. And what's scary to me is like, hey, there's a whole tranche of business and consumer that are we so reliant on the apples, the this, the that.
Yeah, that's what kind of gets me a little bit. Is everybody poops on Bitcoin like it's not a form of money or other blockchains. I don't want to say crypto because I hate that term crypto because it's a misnomer, but blockchains. But realistically, it's just like you've got Apple Pay, PayPal, Venmo, other digital things. Blockchain is just another digital rail if you want to look at it from a financial lens. Personally, I see blockchain as nothing more than the transmission and storage of data. So, however, take So
Well,
why companies wouldn't implement it is a question.
what'd you say again? Sorry.
Why companies wouldn't choose to implement some sort of blockchain, at least, to a degree, maybe not 100% financial on their platforms, is a big question to me.
Well, I know in the United States it's not super. It's 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 got it's I don't want to be melodramatic, but it is definitely
It's been
redheaded
propagandized.
future of payments right now. Well, we're just past 4 and we're getting ready to wrap up. Does anybody have anything else that they wanna ask Patrick? And just so you know, in the chat, I did link that article I
Oh,
found about.
I wasn't even looking. Yeah, I'm looking at chat.
You see it? Um, does anybody else have anything they want to add or ask? Hey. Well,
Thanks.
um,
Do some research on buy now, pay later, and supply chain finance because it's still fascinating to me.
Sounds good.
we'll have to think about KYC as
Maybe
another topic.
KYC. Yeah, KYC would
Yeah.
be.
I think when you put those 3 together with the point of sale systems, this, and the KYC, I think that would be a nice little
Acceptance
bucket.
and like, yeah.
Yeah, if you're going to do KYC, are you going to do just banks? Or are you going to do Bitcoin ATMs? Are you going to do fiat to crypto? Are you going to do centralized exchanges? Like, is it going to be just a narrow topic on KYC, or are you going to broaden it out to the scope of actual utility?
That's a good question.
Let's noodle on it over Christmas. We'll
Let's
get
do
back
it
to
because that's the thing. That was my KYC was my life for 10 years, and I've been removed from it from so long. So I think that's a good thing to consider a lot.
Yeah, I like it. I like that. I think it's a very relevant topic for us for sure.
Yeah, I use
Um,
Bitcoin ATMs a little bit, and KYC, even though they say that KYC, it's realistically just a, what's the word I want to use? It's show.
it's compliance theater with a lot of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and look at the I always for KYC in terms of I think they're on the 6th or the 7th AML directive now in Europe. That's a or maybe they're just on the 5th, but that's a very good thing to research is the 5th, 6th AML directive. And they seem to be the thought leaders on what's the next generation of KYC in terms of all of what we're talking about.
Good to know. Well, thanks
Yeah,
everybody for
I'm in
coming.
I'm in crypto groups. I just want to comment one thing. I'm in crypto groups, and a lot of users that use the technology or centralized exchanges, which I do not recommend, aren't aware of what even KYC or AML is. So that would be a very good topic.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing. Those were good questions and good discussion. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday and take some time to hug somebody, touch some grass.
Will do.
Yeah. And thanks again, Archie, as always, for being such a constant and getting this stuff out.
My pleasure.
All right, everybody. Well, have a good night. Thanks, Patrick. That was awesome and illuminating and scary, but good.
More to research. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, you guys. Bye.